Great, good to go. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking a little bit of time out this afternoon. I hope you will find our webinar on astaxanthin to be fruitful and educational. So we're very, very excited. This is our first new product launch this year. We are expecting to add a few more to the range throughout the year, but we'll be telling you about those as they come. But today's webinar is going to be telling you all about our wonderful new product, astaxanthin. So this is a wonderful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and we're using a source called AstaPure. And so today's webinar, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what astaxanthin actually is, what it does, and why we have focused on AstaPure rather than looking at any other kind of sources of astaxanthin, because there are many different types out there and many different brands. Let's tell you all about astaxanthin. Okay, so for those of you who do not know anything about astaxanthin, it belongs to the family of naturally occurring pigments, I beg your pardon, called carotenoids. And then there are many hundred, and they are really kind of associated with the sort of like colourful fruit and vegetable and bits and pieces that we've got in our diet. And this is because they absorb specific wavelengths, so we get vibrant yellows and vibrant oranges and vibrant reds. And so if we think about sort of beta carotene and lycopene and things like that, and the sort of fruits and vegetables that they appear in, sort of explains the wonderful sort of colour array. So we've got our carotenoids, we've got carotenes, which are molecules that only contain carbon and hydrogen atoms. I'm not going to go too much into the sort of molecular sort of aspect of it. But the carotenes include things like alpha carotene, beta carotene, and lycopene. And then we move on to the group that contain oxygen atoms. And we break these down primarily into lutein, zeaxanthin, and astaxanthin. Sorry for my pronunciation there. I bet the last time I have to say that. But anyway, and today's focus is really going to be about astaxanthin. And again, for those of you who might not know that much about astaxanthin, it is generally found in abundance in marine animals. So we've got salmon and crabs and things like that. And these animals actually feed on plankton and microalgae that are rich in astaxanthin, and it's responsible for the sort of pink-red colour. So when we think about crabs and salmon and things like that, they're pink because they consume astaxanthin. Now, the biggest source or the most predominant source of astaxanthin is this wonderful little single-celled green algae. And it accumulates astaxanthin, so it progressively goes from green to red under certain environmental conditions. So, and the whole kind of purpose of this is really to protect the cell. So this whole wonderful sort of antioxidant capacity within the cell is there to sort of protect it. And these environmental stresses, things like starvation, high levels of salt, higher temperatures, irradiation, things like that. And astaxanthin, which is produced from this single-celled green algae, is the natural source of astaxanthin, and it is the source of astaxanthin that we use in our new product, which is derived from AstaPure. So astaxanthin products are these bright, bright red colours, and just to give you a kind of indication of this kind of accumulation process. So we start off on the left-hand side, or where we see the letter A. This is our sort of green single-celled algae, and then under certain conditions, and these are obviously sort of under laboratory conditions here, we can see how this sort of progressive accumulation of astaxanthin occurs until we finally have this bright red single-celled algae, lovely packed and rich in astaxanthin, and then ready for the sort of plucking, if you like, sort of getting the astaxanthin out so that we can have it. And again, another little fact, again, some of you might know this, some of you might not, but the lovely flamingos, when the I was going to say the baby, the chicks, I guess. When the chicks hatch, they are actually vibrant white. And they progressively get pinker and pinker and pinker because they thrive on sort of shrimp and these algae that are rich in astaxanthin. So the flamingo, again, a bit like salmon, a bit like crabs, get their vibrant pink color from eating this single cell astaxanthin rich algae. Okay, so another sort of key point here is that as an antioxidant, as a wonderful kind of nutrient, if you like, we can't make astaxanthin ourselves. So unless we are actually consuming it in our diet, we are not going to be reaping the benefits. So if you don't like things like fish and crabs and other sort of marine foods that are rich in astaxanthin, then you're not going to be reaping the benefits. And I'm going to talk about sort of sources in just a minute, but it's just worth sort of pointing out that there's a big difference between the astaxanthin that we would find in maybe a farmed fish versus a wild fish. So if you're predominantly eating farmed salmon, for example, they don't feed off natural source of astaxanthin. They are fed a synthetic form of astaxanthin that is produced from petroleum or sort of chemicals, I believe. And so it doesn't have the synthetic form of astaxanthin, does not have the same health benefits. It does not have the same antioxidant benefits as natural astaxanthin. So the astaxanthin that is fed to farmed fish is purely to take that limp kind of colored gray fish and turn it into a kind of slightly more vibrant pinky color. So it's a little bit artificial. So if you're thinking you're getting lots of astaxanthin from your farmed fish, then you really are not. If you want to have your astaxanthin from food, then you need to be getting it from sort of wild salmon. But again, I'll talk a little bit more about sort of dosages and what we can expect from diet versus supplements in a moment. So now I'm going to talk about some of the factors that are really important when we're talking about sourcing astaxanthin. Because again, it's one of those really kind of complex molecules, nutrients, whatever, that there are lots of bits and pieces about it that can kind of sway its path towards being beneficial or not beneficial. And I've listed just a few here, which I'll go into a bit of detail. And it's really just to sort of highlight some of the important factors that we really need to consider. So with things like stereochemistry, the structure, the configuration, so the way it's kind of structured, esterification, is it attached to a fatty acid, synergy, is it within a natural sort of carotenoid complex, where we get it from. So obviously I've talked about our source being from algae, safety, because this is not a sort of standard nutrient that I've said that, you know, we make ourselves. This is something that we are incorporating out of the food chain and into our sort of food chain. We know that astaxanthin has been deemed to be safe for many, many years. So it's been kind of incorporated into our food chain for at least 15 years, I believe. So it's been sort of given GRAS status, if you like. So efficacy. We're going to talk about things that influence sort of how effective it is, astaxanthin sort of management, treatments and things like that. And then dosage. How much astaxanthin do we need to take to see a fruitful effect? Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about stereochemistry. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, and I've just kind of thrown this picture in really just to sort of help visualize things. But all you really need to know is that astaxanthin, like many molecules, can be present as different shapes. Astaxanthin comes in 3 distinct shapes, and whilst natural and synthetic astaxanthin share the same kind of molecular formula, the actual structures are very, very different. So only natural astaxanthin comes in what we call the 3S. So that kind of just what I'll sort of call it for now. Synthetic astaxanthin is very different. So it's very important to know that when you're consuming astaxanthin from astaxanthin supplements, that it is in the 3S form. And this is what we find in AstaPure. So this is a nice, as the name of the product sort of tells you, it's Asta and it's pure. So yes, so it's the correct distinct shape that is required for an effect. Okay, so that's the first kind of thing. So stereochemistry, we source the correct shape of astaxanthin. Okay, so the next thing is esterification. So in nature, astaxanthin can either be found conjugated to proteins. So this is kind of salmon muscle or lobster exoskeleton, or it can be esterified to fatty acid. So it can have a fatty acid at one end or both ends. The predominant form of astaxanthin in our little algae is as a monoester. And the benefits of having these sort of fatty acids within the astaxanthin itself is that it acts to stabilize the astaxanthin molecule. Which is in contrast to sort of synthetic astaxanthin, which is found in what is called the free form. So it's kind of endpoints, and I'll show you a little bit more detail in a moment. Its endpoints are sort of flapping around all free, and unfortunately this makes it very unstable, and it can be quite susceptible to oxidation. So it kind of damages the structure, so it's very important to know that astaxanthin in supplement form is esterified to fatty acids. So within AstaPure, the majority of the astaxanthin is joined to one fatty acid, so it's a monoester. And then the next little factor to take on board is that astaxanthin, the structure, can either be straight chained, called the E isomer, or it can be bent chained, the Z isomer. This influences how well our astaxanthin sits within our cell membrane. Haven't mentioned cell membranes yet, but basically astaxanthin is this wonderful molecule that spans our cell membranes, anchoring onto each side of it, adding stability, pointing out and sort of pointing in. But I'll show you a diagram in a minute to just clarify that. Excuse me. So it's actually quite important for astaxanthin to be straight chained, because otherwise it cannot sit very well spanning the cell membrane. So again, if we look at what is in our AstaPure astaxanthin, ours is a very high concentration of both esterified, so we've got monoesterified, but our astaxanthin is in the nice straight chained isomer. So everything is beginning to sort of pull together to make the most sort of productive, proactive form of astaxanthin. So the next thing to think about is synergy. Okay, so again, synthetic, you just have sort of, you have astaxanthin on its own, it's in its free form, it's not very sort of stable, not very antioxidant. I'll talk about that again in a moment. But with our natural astaxanthin, and this is what we find in AstaPure, our astaxanthin is a complex of natural carotenoids. So with our astaxanthin, we have a small amount of other carotenoids as well. So we get a little bit of lutein, beta-carotene, things like that. But the majority of our astaxanthin actually is astaxanthin itself. But I'll add a little bit more on here. It's this kind of, this complex, actually, the addition of these other antioxidant, carotenoids, actually are thought or believed to enhance the sort of therapeutic potential, because you're getting this sort of like lovely little mix of different antioxidants in there. Okay, so here's just a kind of like little summary, a nice little picture of our AstaPure. You can see all the little single-celled algae beginning to turn red there. Ours is concentrated astaxanthin oil, and we add a little bit of extra olive oil as well I'll talk about that again in a moment, because the kind of evidence tends to suggest that this is fat soluble, so the presence of fat is important. Actually, adding a little bit of extra fat can significantly enhance the bioavailability of our astaxanthin. And again, there's some other evidence that suggests, which is quite unusual sometimes with sort of taking supplements, but it's best to take your astaxanthin supplement after you've eaten rather than before you've eaten. So that can increase the bioavailability by about 2-fold. Okay, so in terms of all the kind of complexy kind of scientific-y chemistry parts of sort of the astaxanthin story, ours fits all the bits. So we tick all the boxes. Our source is natural. Our stereochemistry is 100% 3S3S. Our configuration is the E isomer, the straight isomer. We are esterified to fatty acids, predominantly monoesterified, and we have a lovely synergy. We have a natural carotenoid complex. So it's all of these things, it's these 5 things all brought together that really make a difference to how well astaxanthin works within the body. Okay, so then I'm just going to move on to say another factor that really kind of drove us to choosing AstaPure was the way that it is grown and cultivated. So there seem to be 2 ways of actually sort of growing, if you like, astaxanthin. So it starts off in a kind of a laboratory setting, and then it kind of gets moved out. So it goes from a green stage to a red stage. And it's within these wonderful sort of like long tubes. And if you see these from like an aeroplane, or if you're looking down on them, you just see the sea of red, which is quite stunning, actually. And so AstaPure is actually grown in what is called a closed system. So it protects the astaxanthin. It's very easy to sort of manipulate the environment, but what is really important is that it eliminates microbial, chemical, or any other kind of outdoor contaminations. Other brands of astaxanthin are actually grown in what's called sort of open systems, so like these massive, sort of almost like ponds. But if you can imagine, if you've got sort of like open pond system, then you're going to get less control over things like sort of air pollution, you know, even sort of animals and birds sort of passing over and sort of, you know, doing things that animals and birds do. But basically, so having a closed system really attracted us over having a kind of a pond open system. So to kind of summarize, you know, everything that we've sort of like really looked at has been the focus of having an astaxanthin product that was going to be the very, very best. Okay, so I'm going to talk now. So I've kind of gone into a little bit about what drove us to choosing AstaPure over other astaxanthins. I'm now going to talk to you a little bit about astaxanthin, what it is, mechanisms of action, and those kind of sort of areas. Now, so astaxanthin is probably one of the most potent antioxidants, and again, I'll talk about things like sort of ORAC and bits like that. But and I don't really kind of need to sort of talk to people about sort of free radicals and disease and things like that. But we know that oxidative stress and inflammation play an integral role in the pathophysiology of chronic disease. Where we have high levels of oxidative stress, we are driving inflammation. And we know that inflammation is at the core of just about any health condition that we can think of. So it's really important that we have good antioxidant defense system to keep sort of free radicals and things like that in check. And we know, so this, yes, here we go, a lovely little diagram here, basically pointing out free radical oxidative stress hits anything from the brain to the heart to kidneys, eyes. So yes, free radicals initiate disease, and I think we all kind of are on par and in agreement on that. So what is it about astaxanthin that makes it so wonderful in terms of it being an antioxidant? So I've kind of included a slightly simpler diagram of our antioxidant sort of molecule. And it has these wonderful little hydroxyl and ketone, and I'll pop that in at the top, groups that are responsible or believed to be responsible for its sort of high antioxidant activity. And it's these structures that actually allow astaxanthin to sort of hook into the inner membrane and the outer membrane. And then we have this kind of like long sort of stream of or string of double bonds that then sit within the membrane itself. And the carotenoids are well known because they have, high levels of double bonds, but it's only the ones that have in excess of 9 double bonds that are actually be able to sort of be considered as the sort of best quenchers of sort of singlet oxygen molecules. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So astaxanthin, which is really, really key, is not actually destroyed during the process of neutralizing free radicals. And this means that it can just keep going. It just can be repeatedly sort of quenching sort of these singlet oxygen, so these sort of damaging radicals. And this is reflected by its very, very high ORAC score. And again, I'm kind of assuming that the majority of people here know what the ORAC is, but just in case there's a few people who aren't familiar, the ORAC is the oxygen radical absorbance capacity, and it's an established, reliable, and well-known, I guess, indicator of a nutrient's capacity to eliminate free radicals. The higher the score, the more efficient that nutrient is at neutralizing free radicals. Okay, so I'll show you a nice little diagram of that in a minute, comparing it to some other antioxidants. But here is a wonderful picture to just kind of really highlight, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to use my mouse here to sort of highlight things. So our astaxanthin is sitting in the middle here. So as I was saying, it's these groups here that sort of hook onto the outside of the cell and then onto the inside of the cell. So they're basically sticking out, inside, outside, and then went a little bit too fast there. My mouse doesn't like me doing that. And then it sort of sits spanning the membrane, whereas we've got sort of other antioxidants. So we've got vitamin C on the outside, and then we've got our sort of cholesterol molecules in there as well. So it kind of spans the membrane quite uniquely and very differently to the majority of antioxidants, which is what makes it quite nice. And the fact that it sort of spans the membrane means that it's actually kind of stabilizing the membrane as well. So if you've got nice plump cells, nice levels of fatty acids and things like that, and then you've got lots of astaxanthin in there, you've got nice, stable cells. Okay, so it's also down to the fact that astaxanthin has all these multiple conjugated double bonds, which allows it to act as this sort of strong antioxidant. And it works by electron donation and by reacting with free radicals. So it's kind of a twofold thing. It's a quencher and a scavenger. So if we go back to sort of comparing our antioxidant astaxanthin with other well-known antioxidant, and this little table here is taken from the paper that's sort of sitting at the bottom there. Looking at the ORAC scale and looking at the ORAC value, comparing it to different antioxidants. So even things like alpha lipoic acid, green tea, CoQ10, vitamin C, vitamin E, things like that. Astaxanthin outweighs them all. So its capacity to quench singlet oxygen, and they're the kind of like really nasty little targety sort of free radicals that do some really significant damage. Astaxanthin is a really strong, really potent antioxidant. Hence the name King of Antioxidants, which is quite a nice little robust name there. So its unique molecular structure is superior in the way that it positions itself in the cell membrane. So the general rule, if you like, of antioxidants is that the lipid-soluble antioxidants protect the lipid-soluble part of the cells, and then vice versa, the water ones protect the water-soluble part of the cells. Astaxanthin does both. And then, as I've said, it provides this wonderful cell membrane stability. So its direct antioxidant actions are that it quenches singlet oxygen and it scavenges free radicals. And together this prevents or terminates chain reactions. And then it has a number of indirect antioxidant actions. And this is through its ability to upregulate other antioxidant enzymes, so glutathione, peroxidase, and sort of enzymes like that, which again I'll talk about in a moment. And then if we actually look at the role of antioxidants themselves, so some antioxidants, such as vitamin C and vitamin E, under certain conditions, obviously, you know, they're donating electrons, and then they then can themselves become pro-oxidants. Which I guess if you're throwing antioxidants into an individual who is absolutely full of inflammation, and they've not been eating their fruit and veg, and so their antioxidant supplies are going to be quite depleted, then actually some antioxidants can themselves become pro-oxidants, and they can sort of actually add to fuel. So we hear of this sort of stories and papers and articles that are published saying, oh, you shouldn't take antioxidants because they're bad for you. There's a kind of a little bit of truth in that, but under very specific conditions. And this is why it's really important to make sure that when you are recommending antioxidants, or even taking them yourselves, that you make sure that you have a really good sort of variety. So, it's the sort of, you don't want to do the sort of meat and two veg kind of thing that, parents kind of did. It's just like, you need to have a huge amount of different varieties, lots of different colors of foods and fruits and veg, all on the same plate, are going to be giving you a really good, diverse exposure to different antioxidants. And it's the same when we're supplementing. So don't just kind of think, well, I'm giving somebody vitamin C, or I'm giving them vitamin E, that's going to be adequate in itself. No, we need to make sure that our antioxidant defense systems are well supplied with a variety of different antioxidants. So whilst I'm sort of sitting here telling you how wonderful astaxanthin is, I am not for one moment suggesting that it kind of should really replace everything that you kind of think of in terms of antioxidant recommendations. So it's a wonderful complementary addition, because I haven't really got around to the whole kind of astaxanthin as a pure antioxidant. Astaxanthin can never become a pro-oxidant, so it just goes on and on and on, and that's why it is such a wonderful addition to our antioxidant sort of supplies. Right, okay, so if we look at a lot of the kind of mechanism papers, and I've sort of drawn out a few bits and pieces from different papers and just sort of shoved them onto one page, because we could talk forever about all the mechanisms of action behind astaxanthin. But just to sort of cover a few, and again, a lot of you will be familiar with these kind of mechanisms and pathways and promoters and things like that. Some of the things that astaxanthin does is it acts as a COX-2 inhibitor. So that in itself is going to help block a potentially inflammatory pathway. And then we've got the suppression of things like inflammatory gene expression, our little favorite one, nuclear factor kappa B. And if you can suppress, or if you can downregulate, or you can stop nuclear factor kappa B activation, then you're going to naturally suppress inflammatory agents such as prostaglandins, interleukins, TNF-alpha. These are the kind of considered to be like key pro-inflammatory mediators which promote inflammatory responses. So lots of different mechanisms of action. Majority of them are sort of focused on on down-regulating, suppressing inflammation. So this is all good stuff, really. Another really nice factor about astaxanthin is that it's got this ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and the blood-retinal barrier. So it accumulates really nicely in both the brain and the eye. So again, there's a little bit of evidence coming showing you the benefits of astaxanthin, or increasing astaxanthin, for both sort of neurocognitive function and sort of eye health as well. Okay, so again, astaxanthin, still kind of relative infancy in terms of a lot of research out there in humans. A lot of the research is in vitro. There's a lot of animal evidence as well sort of coming out. A few more kind of human intervention studies we're seeing. But the kind of, drawing out the information out of the numerous papers that are out there, we can see benefits for things like muscles and joints, eye health. Again, astaxanthin accumulates really nicely into the eyes, along with things like lycopene and zeaxanthin. It's good for energy, reduces tiredness and fatigue. One of the key areas that astaxanthin sort of, I was going to say favors, but it's not quite the right word. When I say cell membranes, accumulating in cell membranes, we can also think about the importance of that within sort of mitochondria. If you think about the amount of free radicals that are produced just as a sort of normal day-to-day sort of metabolic function, as a sidekick process from sort of mitochondrial function, then having lots of lovely astaxanthin within our mitochondria is going to offer us a lot of protection there, and that in itself kind of helps to explain the sort of reduction in tiredness and fatigue. Gut health, liver health, metabolic syndrome, diabetes. There's lots of different areas that have been sort of associated with astaxanthin, and astaxanthin sort of antioxidant, anti-inflammatory benefits. And then, one of the big ones is skin. Some nice sort of human studies showing that actually topical astaxanthin as well is really good for reducing things like UV damage. There's some nice kind of, there's a paper that I haven't included actually, but some very nice pictures of some crow's feet sort of being sort of suppressed and ironed out in sort of middle-aged women. So good for reducing wrinkles when applied topically and taken orally as well. Helps to boost the immune system, great for cardiovascular health, lowers lipids, cholesterol, triglycerides. I've mentioned that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so of course it's going to help with things like cognitive function. Then sort of driving down, there's some studies that are sort of showing an association for sort of improvements and benefits for conditions such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. Fertility is another one, a great one. And then a lot of interest, obviously, in sort of the big C. Astaxanthin has been shown to affect various pathways involved in cell growth, proliferation, metastasis, and so on. So all of these kind of benefits, all brought together, are really kind of down to the anti-inflammatory, antioxidant benefits attributed to astaxanthin. Right, okay, so how much do we need? Where do we get it from? That kind of thing really coming. So supplement versus food. So I've already kind of mentioned that unless you're consuming sort of marine foods that are feeding on a natural source of astaxanthin, that's the only way that you're going to get it in your diet. So anybody who is sort of, you know, not an oily fish loving person, maybe you're vegan, vegetarian, you're not consuming sort of astaxanthin supplements, then you're not really benefiting from the many benefits that astaxanthin brings. Now, a few years ago, we're going back quite a few years ago now, when krill really kind of hit the headlines. Krill was touted for this sort of answer to fish oils. Not only was it sort of phospholipid and a natural source of omega-3s, but it was also this kind of wonderful source of astaxanthin. So krill oil, bright pink, since the kind of all the sort of headlines around krill and some of the sort of bioavailability sort of studies have kind of pointed to the fact that actually krill isn't quite as effective at raising omega-3 levels as sort of more concentrated omega-3 supplements or even just sort of standard fish oils. So I think the sort of krill hype is dying down and sort of being exposed for not being quite as factual as some of the sort of manufacturers would like people to have believed. But when we can kind of compare the amount of the amount of astaxanthin that is actually within krill compared to how much you would get from a sort of standard astaxanthin standalone supplement, really isn't an awful lot. So firstly, if you look at something like krill oil, delivers about maybe 15, 14, 17 maximum percent as omega-3. And within 1 gram of krill oil, you're probably looking at maybe 50 micrograms of astaxanthin. It's not a huge amount. I think the smallest sort of capsule size of astaxanthin supplement delivers about 4 milligrams. So that's quite a big difference between 50 micrograms and 4 milligrams. In each of our astaxanthin supplements, we deliver 4 milligrams, and I'll explain why we've come to that dose in just a moment. To achieve 4 milligrams, and this is 4 milligrams doesn't sound like a lot, but when we actually kind of look at how much salmon we need to eat to get that kind of amount, we can see it's quite a lot. So I've kind of clarified the importance of wild salmon as a source. You'd need to eat 1 1/4 portions of wild salmon, a portion being 85 grams. You'd need to eat 1 1/4 portions of salmon to achieve 4 milligrams. When we're looking at something like farmed salmon, if you go down to the sort of bottom down here, so there's 0.6. So you have to eat an awful lot of farmed salmon to get the same kind of equivalent dose as you would get from 1 4 milligram capsule of our AstaPure astaxanthin. And so there's just a few kind of like little kind of comparisons there as well. So you've got our salmons, our planktons, our krill, and so on. So actually, the most effective way to get your astaxanthin is from an astaxanthin supplement. Right, okay, so this is where we get into the minefield of astaxanthin supplements. And we all know that when, we can walk into our health store, but these days it's not health stores, it's kind of online stores. Sometimes there can be so many different types of a supplement. It can be really kind of misleading, trying to work out what the quality is. Are they delivering the label claims, that kind of thing. One thing that we found that was very misleading, or we consider it to be very misleading, is that, and this is not an AstaPure product that I'm showing you here, but it's a competitor's product, and it's just showing you how misleading the label claims can be. When you're looking at an astaxanthin supplement, you want to know that you are getting your milligram dosage. So to achieve a 4 milligram label claim of astaxanthin, you need to put 42 milligrams of a bulk oil in, because any astaxanthin oil is either going to be 5%, 10%. It's never kind of a pure astaxanthin. So you need to reflect the amount that you're putting in or kind of up-regulate the amount that you put in to achieve your label claim. So this is a kind of a classic one here, where the supplier of this astaxanthin supplement were putting 5% oil in, and they were putting 12 milligrams in, and yet they were making a 12 milligram claim. And the reason that it was very clear that this wasn't a 12 milligram astaxanthin product was because it was just very cheap. And we all know that, the kind of value of a product, especially when it comes to sort of, really good quality products, you do end up paying a little bit more. So if something is cheap, there's a reason for it. Anyway, so we put 42 milligrams of our 10% oil in to get our 4 milligram claim. And you think to yourself, okay, well, the maths doesn't add up there. You wouldn't need to put 42 in, would you? Right. Okay, so here's the kind of clarification. Talked a few slides back about astaxanthin being a sort of natural carotenoid complex. So of your kind of 10% oil, some of that actually is other forms. So we've got astaxanthin, got a little bit of lutein, but this is our label, and we're really clear about what you get. So, and this is where we kind of really stand out. So we tell you exactly what you're getting. We're telling you how much of our raw oil we're putting in, and we're telling you exactly what carotenoids you are getting. So you're getting astaxanthin, you're getting a bit of beta-carotene, you're getting some lutein, and it's a really nice little complex, and it's very nice and crystal clear. So you can see exactly what you're getting. And you will not see this on other labels. You'll literally just say, you'll literally just see 4 milligrams astaxanthin, which isn't true. Okay, so that's a little bit about our astaxanthin, what it is, what it does. Let's just talk, because again, this is quite important as well. Bioavailability, absorption, digestion, that kind of thing. I don't need to go into a huge amount of detail. All you really need to know is that astaxanthin, fat soluble, is digested and absorbed in a very similar way to standard lipids and fat soluble vitamins. So formed into or incorporated into chylomicrons, released into the lymph, and then distributed around the body. The presence of dietary fat is known to affect the degree of absorption, so not a good idea to take your astaxanthin on an empty stomach. I did mention, again, a few slides back, that it's best to actually take astaxanthin after you've eaten, and to take it after your meal with the sort of highest presence of fat. So generally, it's generally a kind of a main meal tends to be the sort of highest fat content. And we also emulsify our astaxanthin within some extra olive oil as well. So it's not to sort of dilute the oil per se, but it's to increase the bioavailability. So that's kind of all you really need to know about sort of absorption and digestion. If you're making a recommendation, just make it really clear. Don't take it on an empty stomach. Take it with your fattiest meal and take it after you've eaten. Okay, so a little bit about sort of the uptake. Okay. Oh yes, this is the study from the sort of bioavailability of astaxanthin increased by twofold if you take it take it after your meal, for example. So this was just a little study, really, sort of showing the uptake of astaxanthin after a 10 milligram dose. There were two different doses. One was 100 milligrams, one was 10 milligrams. But you can see that there's a really nice kind of clear increase. Cmax for the low dose was 0.08 milligrams per litre, and then for the higher dose it was 0.28 milligrams per litre. Reached within 11.5 hours after taking, and the plasma half-life was about 52 hours. So one capsule, and I have to say this was a little bit higher than the sort of standard 4 milligram dose. The reason that a lot of the sort of pharmacokinetic data studies are at slightly higher doses is to increase the kind of assay performance. If you have something and you give it a very low dose, it's very difficult sometimes to sort of spot it when you're sort of looking at increases. So when looking at or trying to work out things like half-lives and things like that, it's better to have a slightly higher dose. You can sort of work things out, do the maths a little bit easier. Anyway, so the half-life is about 52 hours. So a 1/4 milligram capsule is going to still last you all day, pretty much. Okay, so there's a few studies. These have all kind of been sort of performed in generally sort of healthy adults. This was just to really highlight that you can get quite significant benefits just from a dose as low as 4 milligrams. This was a study looking at different dosing. So they used 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, and 20 milligrams. And they found that even at 4 milligrams, things like blood pressure was lowered, triglycerides, fasting values, of glucose values, were all beneficial. And they the authors sort of go on to sort of talk about benefits in people with things like sort of borderline diabetes or people who are at risk for metabolic syndrome, basically because of the blood pressure, benefits for sort of glucose control, triglycerides, cholesterol, things like that. So even at 4 milligrams, so a relatively kind of light low dose. And then another study, again, this is kind of highlighting how much you really have to take. This was a study in which astaxanthin at doses of 0 being the control, 2 milligrams or 8 milligrams, given to people for 8 weeks. So, you know, a couple of months, not even that long. And they showed that even doses between sort of 2 to 8 milligrams produce significant benefits in sort of areas of things like inflammation. So lowered inflammation, decreased DNA oxidative damage, biomarkers. So again, so good benefits at low dose. And then I thought I would just sort of include, some of these are kind of reviews, a few sort of meta-analysis and things like that, have really kind of just sort of highlighted the benefits of astaxanthin. So there was, again, this is relatively recently, this is in 2015. This paper was talking about astaxanthin as a neuroprotective agent for neurological diseases. Again, sort of talking about some of the sort of antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-apoptotic effects of astaxanthin. And again, it's sort of going back to the fact that astaxanthin can cross the blood-brain barrier, the BBB there. And another review, this time astaxanthin, a potential therapeutic agent in managing cardiovascular disease. Again, so this goes back to sort of, you know, anti-inflammatory, plaque reduction, lipid reduction, cholesterol reduction. So lots of sort of benefits against oxidative stress and inflammation in sort of areas for sort of cardiovascular benefits. Another little one here, talking actually about sort of use in sort of clinic as well. So sort of highlighting a number of benefits here, actually looking at this, anti-stress, anti-inflammatory, benefits in limiting exercise-induced muscle damage and so on. And all again, sort of highlighting the sort of benefits for sort of lifestyle-related conditions such as obesity and so on. Okay, oh, and the big one. So I have mentioned this before about not only is it the blood-brain barrier that astaxanthin can cross, but it can actually get into the eye as well. So if we think of things like age-related macular degeneration and cataracts and things, these are all associated with light-induced oxidative damage. Several studies have looked at the benefits of sort of antioxidants in reducing the risk of sort of eye degenerative sort of conditions. And there's a couple of studies that have looked at the combination of lutein, zeaxanthin and astaxanthin and found a number of improvements in symptoms associated with things like age-related macular degeneration. So again, kind of, you know, the whole kind of area of brain and health are big areas of focus for astaxanthin. Oh, and there we are. There's the one for sort of retinal damage. So I don't really kind of need to go into that too much. Again, another little eye one here. Got excited about that. Okay, so, right. So if we think about how much astaxanthin we need to see in effect, then we know that as little as 2 milligrams a day can have certain benefits. 4 milligrams a day appears to be a very effective general health, just kind of keeps things ticking over, gets everything kind of like working nicely, a little bit of protection against inflammation and so on. So we kind of class this as like sort of everyday well-being. If you want sort of medium intensity support, then we can move up to maybe 4 to 8 milligrams daily. And then some of the sort of studies have shown doses up to about 16 milligrams have been quite effective. So it's really about sort of going to the individual, working out, you know, where they are, what condition have they got, and their own sort of personal circumstances really, and sort of making a judgment from there. There are supplements that already kind of pack 12 milligrams in them, but we don't. The reason that we chose 4 milligrams was that you don't need to have 12 milligrams to have an effect. You only need 12 milligrams if you are sort of needing sort of therapeutic support. So that we leave that down to the practitioner or the individual to make that choice. And also, I guess it's about, you know, are there the benefits that we see from split dosing as well? So if we take 12 milligrams all in one go, then, you know, we may see some significant benefits, but actually it's probably better if we're split dosing. So if you're taking 4 capsules, which would be your 16 milligrams, you know, take half in the morning, take half in the evening, or, you know, making sure obviously that you're sort of taking with adequate fat to get your astaxanthin levels nice and high throughout the day. So this is just the kind of sort of nutritional information. You've seen the label back a few slides. Just really a slide sort of telling you what's in it and all the kind of extra bits and pieces, just to sort of re-clarify, I guess. No general dosing recommendations, but like I said, anything between sort of 4 milligrams and 16 milligrams. So again, we sort of see a breakdown of what's actually within our 42 milligrams of AstaPure. So our label claim of 4 milligrams of astaxanthin, and then we've got some other carotenoids in there as well. And then I think it's just a few kind of bits on AstaPure advantages. And this is taken from the AstaPure people, if you like. So what we like about these guys is that, you know, it's environmentally friendly. They use something called green technology, so it's all energized by natural sunlight. Obviously, you've got to extract the astaxanthin from your little algae, and they use a process of supercritical CO2 extraction, so that means there are no organic solvent residues anywhere. They use the highest commercial concentration of natural astaxanthin. And that's kind of it, really. I mean, that's the sort of AstaPure. So there's lots of reasons, and I hope that's been really clear as to why we chose AstaPure, why we've added astaxanthin to our product range, and hopefully kind of what it does, a little bit about dosing. And then I think just really, and again, this is kind of really kind of a summary to show you of the kind of the amount and diversity of the studies out there that are supporting AstaPure astaxanthin. So the kind of blue ones are really to sort of highlight some of the human studies, and obviously a lot of support from sort of animal and in vitro and in vivo studies. So again, lots of benefits for astaxanthin on sort of cardiovascular system, so things like lipids, hypertension, stroke incidence, dyslipidemia, and so on. All kind of, you know, when we're talking about increased, then that's good. If it's improved, that's good. If it's reduced in certain situations, that's good. So plenty of studies, and this is not an exhaustive list, let's put it that way. So there's more, it's just a kind of like little example, really. Astaxanthin on the eye, astaxanthin in general kind of health areas. I talked a little bit about skin earlier, so things about sort of, you know, sort of skin elasticity and moisture. Then we've got things like immune response, general inflammation. Interesting outcomes on gut health as well, surprisingly. So astaxanthin can have benefits for things like gastric ulcers, for example. And there's a few more on the eye. There's a lot of information out there actually on astaxanthin in the eye, and again, it's because of the within the eye itself, you naturally kind of find things like zeaxanthin and so on, but because astaxanthin offers this kind of additional antioxidant benefits, and it goes back to this sort of like the way it spans the membrane. It just offers that little bit extra to sort of benefiting against the sort of damage from sort of UV light and things like that. So it's really good for sort of eyes and visions, eye health. Yes, okay, something I haven't really kind of mentioned is the benefits of astaxanthin in sort of endurance exercise and things like that. So sort of helps to reduce things like soreness after exercising. It's really good for sort of energy and fatigue, things like that. Oxidative damage, obviously, which is going to increase if you are heavily exercising. So anybody who's very sporty, this is the perfect antioxidant. And again, as I kind of was sort of talking about earlier, this is not us suggesting that you wipe out all of your other antioxidants if you're taking anything. This is probably the most complementary antioxidant that you can get. So, you know, introduce it, and then it will just help this whole kind of synergistic approach to managing inflammation and oxidative stress. And I think, so, okay, so here's just really a summary, going back a little bit to the chemistry, but really why we chose AstaPure. I've talked about, you know, what it does and why we love it and why we're very excited about it. But this is really just kind of the summary of why we chose AstaPure and why we think that this is the you know, the king of all the products that are out there. So it's kind of really about the way that it's manufactured. We're really happy that, you know, things like this, the fact that it's esterified, it's in the straight E isomer, and so on and so on. And the fact that you can get benefits from as little as 2 milligrams a day is really encouraging as well. And the fact that we don't consume it really in our diets unless, like I said, unless you're consuming wild salmon on a daily basis, it's very unlikely that you're going to be exposed to astaxanthin unless you supplement. So that brings me to the end of today's webinar, and I hope it's been educational. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you will maybe want to inquire a little bit more about astaxanthin and what you can do with it. And I think Sophie I can see that there's a bit of a chat thing going on there. And I think Sophie will probably be chatting away and answering all your questions. So I'm going to carry on and let Sophie very competently answer all the questions. Of course, do feel free to drop us an email if you think of something after the end of the day or anything like that. Yeah, look out. We've got another webinar probably towards the end of March. We're going to sort of talk a little bit again about astaxanthin, but we're going to give you a huge overhaul on antioxidants and the sort of synergistic benefits of consuming multiple antioxidants and how they support when you should actually think about multiple antioxidants and which ones to take with which ones.